This episode is dedicated to Tani Toshiaki, Yelena Mandenberg, Akio Fields, and Jay for becoming our newest Southpaw supporters and helping to make this project possible.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our inaugural episode of Pride Never Die. It's your personal confidant and friendly neighborhood host, Karian, and today I am joined by the best possible guest I could have asked for to start this show off. She is a true pioneer in LGBTQ combat sports and athletics in general, the first trans MMA fighter in the game, and a fierce defender of trans rights everywhere. She is the Queen of Swords, Fallon Fox. Thank you so much for joining me today, Fallon. It is truly an honor to have you on the show.
Hey, thank you for having me on the show today. I really appreciate it.
So would you like to introduce yourself or anything about yourself to some of our listeners if they might not be familiar? I imagine most of them will be.
Yeah, sure. My name is Fallon Fox. I'm a retired professional MMA fighter and trans activist. Let's see, I began training in around 2007 in jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and trained in that for a little while. Then I moved on to Muay Thai, trained in that for about like 8 months. Then moved to an MMA gym and started training there. And I first had my first amateur fight back in 2011, I think. And I had 3 amateur fights, professional. Then I started in professional MMA in 2012, and my record is 6-1-0.
One of the first questions I wanted to have for you is how would you describe your style as a fighter, and how much of your personality do you think you kind of come at that from? Like when you're fighting, how much of your personality comes through in that?
That's a good question. I suppose I like to describe my style. I've never been asked this question before, so I suppose I like to describe it as intelligently aggressive.
Okay.
I guess my personality is attached to the way I approach a fight because, in the late part of my career, I was both battling my opponents and, the crowd at the same time. So my personality really comes out when I'm fighting because I'm not the kind of person that likes to give up. And that's just what my career has been. It's just been a lot of just, not giving up. So just aggressively, fighting and in an intelligent way.
Yeah, a lot of forward movement, a lot of putting pace on people, but also being aware of where you're at and kind of controlling that aggression in a way, and knowing how to use it as a tool and not let something like that can't really lose yourself in that aggression.
Oh yeah, really, especially when you're out there and people are saying hateful, bigoted things. It's like I can't just jump out of the cage and start fighting the crowd.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you have to find a good way to somehow funnel that.
Yeah, you can't get too aggressive or you'll just lose all your technique. So
yeah, I like that a lot. I think a lot of your career is very it's always going to be very unique, just being a trans woman and being someone that has to deal with that and deal with all the bigoted things that are being said. And it's kind of like in pro wrestling and stuff, they have heels that the crowd is supposed to hate, and you end up inhabiting that character and kind of using it to inform how you're going to behave. But you almost get forced into that from some of the bigotry that can come in from MMA culture and things like that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely can put you in that category as someone who's looked at as a heel, or supposedly, if you're trans in MMA.
Yes. Speaking on that, I would like to move on to another question that I had for you, which was that as a trans woman, and specifically the first trans woman competing in your sport, it always feels like there is a pressure that's on you to represent your entire community and to be this model coming in. And I was wondering what it felt like for you to feel like you had that kind of like weight on your shoulders coming into something as the first trans woman to compete and get all of that attention.
I suppose for a while it was a pretty heavy thing to deal with.
Hmm.
I was the only prominent transgender athlete that was out there competing at that time. So
Right.
all the eyes were on me, and I
Hmm.
felt like I couldn't screw up anything because there was a lot riding on me. The whole trans community was riding on me, I think,
Hmm.
in that regard. But now there's just so many transgender athletes that are out there competing. So the focus really isn't on just one athlete in particular, which I think helps others out in the future. But yeah, it was like a lot of weight and a lot of responsibility to have to take on, and I felt like I had to watch what I said a lot of
Hmm.
the
Yeah. I feel like sometimes in certain groups, even within the queer community, something that gets kind of ignored or sometimes even blatantly like called false as the idea that you have a stacking effect on you of being confronted with not only homophobia but also white supremacy. And black trans athletes in particular are always going to have more of like the brunt of just that hatred and that like vitriol. And I was also wondering if you felt like some of the negativity you received from the MMA community was also related to the fact that you are a black trans woman.
Mm, yeah, it's also another good question. I'm not sure about how much of the hatred I got was from racism.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think there are challenges that LGBTQ people of color face as athletes. Heck, even cisgender women of color get a bad rap
Yeah, right.
because of their ethnicity. People often say that black women are mannish in sports anyway. So I think this
Hmm.
carries over to transgender women of color. I think that if I didn't happen to be black, I would have still faced bigotry,
Yeah,
because I was the only trans person in sports.
right.
I But being black just adds another layer to it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it gives the people that already had some of that hatred in them a little bit more of like a sort of
Excuse.
like an excuse and like a bravery to actually speak up when they feel like they have even more leverage over someone. They feel like they have even more power in the situation.
Yeah.
um I definitely think people who are transphobic are always going to be transphobic no matter if it's a white person, black person, Asian. It doesn't matter to them. But I do think that's just so much more weight as well that that's something that it's really hard to deal with. And I think I always get really disappointed in white queer communities when I don't hear people thinking about that and they think of their own struggles as always, inherently the hardest.
Yeah.
What do you think the LGBT community and trans folks in particular stand to gain from learning about and participating in martial arts and combat sports?
I think the LGBTQ community can learn about assertiveness and self-defense from combat sport. You see, most LGBTQ people are scared to join into combat sports because of how misogynistic, homophobic, and transphobic the space is.
Hmm.
That's what I think. So I think assertiveness and self-defense is like missing in our communities. That's something like we should like have. You know,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
yeah, and it's just one more reason why I got into combat sports is because I felt that that was lacking in our community. I felt like I just didn't want to be a person who didn't have that,
Hmm.
and so I joined martial arts in part to fulfill that. So
Yeah, that's certainly something that I feel as well. Is I actually started training before I realized a lot of things about myself and realized I was trans and realized I was gay and things like that. And after I had realized that, it was one of those things where I had already had some of these skills. And that's something that I really think is important for me to try to do with that, is to try to spread the skills I was able to gain and still have into the community, and try to give people a way to come into combat sports in a way where they don't feel like they're going to run into that pressure and all of that bigotry and hatred and everything else that seems like it's so ingrained in a lot of the martial arts community, especially in America right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's certainly something that's really important for our community.
It's especially important for trans women, I think.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, women have it bad, like just walking outside at night,
Mm-hmm.
you feel like insecure. And I felt that, really insecure when I would step out at night and just scared of, like, if someone were to attack me, what would I do? And, jumping at the, at the slightest sound at night. But now, like, it's still totally the opposite. Like, I don't even worry about it as much as I used to. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that like that's real empowerment to feel, actually secure in your ability to just live your life without feeling like you're always in danger.
yeah.
And then you already said that, this is part of the reason you got into combat sports, but I already wanted to ask you what exactly enticed you about combat sports and MMA in particular that made you want to be a competitor?
Oh, let's see. What enticed me? A lot of it was looking at all of the other women MMA fighters that were out there. Like Gina Carano, Rosie Sexton, Julie Kedzie. It was like people like that who inspired me. Gina Carano before she turned right wing.
Yeah, right.
Just seeing
Uh,
them compete and like how it empowered them, and I wanted to be just like them, like.
mhm.
And I remember when I first went to my first MMA gym, there were women there who were punching bags and, you know, kicking and sparring. And they were just like really tough women, like engaged in a really aggressive sport. Yeah. And I wanted to be just like them. And yeah, it was a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a very common thing that draws a lot of women into combat sports, is getting to see those competitors and getting to see the way that they carry themselves and the way that they can push through adversity and still come off as, still feminine and still the same exact amount of a woman still, even though still competing. And I think that's another good thing for trans women in particular to see, which is one of the reasons why I was, always so glad that you did compete. Is I think a lot of trans women have this idea sometimes where you view like the feminine way of life as always being soft, always being, a more like fragile thing. And I think it's important for trans women to realize that they don't have to try to embody that at all times, that being a strong woman is still being a woman.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I had this idea before I started training that like from society
Mm-hmm.
that, in order to be accepted as a woman, I couldn't do anything like combat sports or anything like that, like
Yeah.
I enjoyed combat sports pre-transition.
Mm-hmm.
Um, watching the first UFC fights that came out, like, back in, was it the 90s or whatever? Yeah, all of that kind of like left my mind for a long period of time. Especially when I transitioned, I thought that I would never be able to do that before because you would never be accepted,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But like I said, I saw all those other women competing and found out that, like, hey, if they're women and they're doing the sport, then why can't I do this and be a woman and do the same sport?
Right. What do you think it's going to take to really shift the way the media talks about trans women, in particular in sports? How can we get past the accusations of unfair advantages and start to be seen as individuals with our own sets of skills and traits outside of being a trans woman?
I think it's going to take a lot of education on the issue of transgender women in sports,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's going to take more transgender athletes coming out as themselves.
Yeah.
And it's similar to like the entertainment industry, how like some actors came out as trans, with Pose before Pose, and then like more came out with Pose, and people are like accepting trans women in the entertainment industry for it's a similar
Mm-hmm.
thing. We just need more visibility for trans women to be normalized in sports. And that way, as time goes on, hopefully trans women in sports aren't looked at as being odd. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, and as there are more trans women in sports, people will see our records and they'll notice that we aren't winning everything. They're
Right.
like, there's no unfair advantages, The more of us that come out and compete, I think people will see that.
Mm-hmm. How much do you think that having more trans representation in media as well might also affect that? If we have more trans journalists and more trans women that are covering these sports as well.
Yeah, I think that'll help also because when you have transgender women in the media room, and I'm not a media person, but I would think that having trans people in the room will help that situation because they can counter, and say, hey, mention to the editor or whatever that this isn't the right way to handle the situation. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that I think it's still going to take a lot of time for those trans women to be respected enough by their editors and stuff to be taken seriously at some points.
Yeah.
But I also think there's going to be just a little bit more of a ability to have media that's ran by trans people and for trans people that might not necessarily start, educating people at first, but as it becomes a bigger thing and other people start to find it, it might be a good way to also educate some cis people about what trans lives are actually like.
Yeah, totally.
Do you still keep up with the sport currently? And if so, how hard is it for you to navigate some of the toxic parts of the fan culture as a fan?
Well, me and MMA have a complicated relationship.
Mm-hmm.
MMA is passion, and it helped me get to the shape and the person that I am today. But much of MMA's fan base, including prominent members like the Rogans and Rouseys and the Dana Whites, are against my entire existence, let alone my participation in the sport.
Right.
So I try to stay away from most MMA related stuff, especially websites nowadays because of their fan base. I don't like looking at the comments.
Yeah.
I've that many UFC fights lately, mostly other promotions, and I really don't even know some of the bigger names that are out there in the sport right now because of all this. But I'm starting to get back into it. So.
Also, do you have a favorite fighter throughout history or who's currently competing that you like to watch? And also, I'm interested in hearing if you have a favorite technique as well.
Really, I don't really have a favorite fighter that I follow right now. At least not one that's active.
Yeah.
All of my favorite fighters are old school, the old school. So, many of them are retired. And it's hard for me to invest my heart into new fighters because I don't know where they stand on transgender athletes competing in the sport.
Yeah.
I invest my feelings in this fighter. They're going to be oh, Fallon Fox,
right.
should competed. So I don't really have favorite, but I think my favorite technique that I like to see would be probably knees to the face.
Okay. Good.
Probably because I got so many KOs with that one, and I like to see people get that off.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where when you have a lot of wins or something with, a certain tool of your arsenal, when you see other people use it successfully, it almost is like a kind of respect that you end up having for them.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you once again for listening to Pride Never Die, and thank you for being here and speaking with me today, Fallon. Do you have anything coming up that you would like to let our audience know about?
Yeah, let's see. There's a biopic in the work about my life, which is pretty cool. Don't know when that's going to be released yet, but stay tuned for that.
Yeah, keep your eye on it.
Keep your eye on it. And also follow me on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can join my Facebook fan page also. So yeah, little plugs for that.
Everyone, yes, go follow Fallon. Just support transgender athletes in general.
And for sure, if you're a transgender athlete out there who's considering the move into mixed martial arts, do so. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of opportunity here, I think.
Mhm.
And you'll see some amazing things coming up here soon. I can't talk about, but
Yes, I definitely think that more trans people that are interested in mixed martial arts and in martial arts in general and combat sports, if you like boxing, if you like kickboxing, if you like jujitsu, move into it and start trying to train with it. Find someone that you feel comfortable training with and get into it. The only way we're going to have more trans fighters is if we start fighting.
right on.
Once again, this is Karian saying thank you for tuning in, and please don't forget to support the Southpaw Project on Patreon. Your support is the only way we can continue to do what we do and provide the inclusive, wholesome content you crave. I will see you again soon on Pride Never Die.